Andrew, the question or the subject matter that we are discussing today is going to be imposter syndrome. So, this is something that you reached out to me and you said you would love to discuss this on today's episode. That feeling of, am I a writer? When do I get to say I am a writer? And how do I feel confident in doing that versus feeling like kind of an outsider? Well, I tell you what, I'm going to pause there because I don't want to put words into your mouth. You sent me this wonderful email saying you'd love to discuss this. What is it about the imposter syndrome? Because we throw the term around a lot. What is it about that specifically that either you have struggled with or you would like to talk about on today's episode?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm really excited too. I thought it was exciting to talk about just because I know that all everyone struggles with it. All kinds of creatives, specifically as writers. I think it's daunting to call yourself a writer because it requires you to have a lot of confidence in your perspective and your voice. And for me personally, as a younger writer, as a younger creative, it's something that I'm actively working through. And so I was excited to kind of share my perspective, hear about your journey as well, and um, kind of figure out what is imposter syndrome. Because I think it means a little something different to everybody. But yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it can mean different things to different people. And that's actually a really good jumping off point because what I hear a lot of people describing as imposter syndrome, I would actually say it's just a fear of the unknown. And
Mm,
that's a good thing. We're very much geared, we are wired to have that fear of the unknown. Otherwise, evolutionarily speaking, we probably wouldn't be here if we weren't afraid of anything. I think we can all
yeah.
agree that that makes sense.
Mm,
So we have this natural tendency to be afraid of something that we haven't done before. If you imagine if we were journeying to new lands, who knows what could be in those lands? Other tribes of people, wild animals, who knows? So we're very much afraid of new things, and that's a good thing. The tricky part is kind of discerning between what is a modern day threat that we really do need to be careful with
mm,
versus more of a psychological threat that it feels uncomfortable, but we should push through that because on the other side of that, there is growth and there
mm.
is, I guess you could say, success. It depends on how you define that word. So the reason I bring this up is because we all have this underlying fear of the unknown. And I think it is a slightly separate subject to imposter syndrome, where I would kind of draw the line, I guess, where I would define imposter syndrome is it's the failure to give ourselves credit for the things that we actually do well,
Mm,
right?
mm, yeah.
So I finished this script. I sent it to a lit manager. I got representation, but I got lucky. It was a lucky guess. They just happened to be looking for that kind of script at the time. They must have been desperate. You come up with all of these reasons why you got signed or you finished the script or whatever, and you don't actually say to yourself, I did a good job.
Mm,
So having gone through that sort of that a bit more of a deeper dive into what is general fear of the unknown versus what is imposter syndrome, how does that land with you? Can you kind of recognize both of those and maybe separate them out?
yeah. Yeah. I love the way you just articulated that. I think definitely what's sticking with me is kind of what you were saying, what's an actual modern day threat versus like a psychological threat. I think for me, hearing you talk about that, I feel that a lot. I'm oftentimes like, maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I like the stars just aligned. But I think if we're talking about like writing and specifically like navigating the industry, yes, it takes a lot of luck and preparation. But I think taking those moments to actually like recognize your worth and your work and what you've done is so important. So first of all, I would like to say good job to myself and good job to you as well, because I don't think I do that enough. But
I,
yeah,
lo- Yeah, I love that. I love that. I once saw a TED talk, and the presenter was so magnificent on stage, and he was saying to the audience, I think at one point he actually had them stand up and just say, "I'm awesome," and
uh,
just give themselves a round of applause. And it made me really think, how often do we actually do that? On a given day, how often do we just say, I'm awesome?
Yeah.
Not much. I mean, I've done it more since I saw the TED Talk, but as a natural state of being, I don't think we typically do that often enough.
No, not at all. For me personally, it's been a lot of when good things happen, I kind of just like, oh, great, that happened. Let's move on to the next thing. And I think very few times in life I'm like, oh, I did this. Like for example, um, calling myself a writer. For me, a lot of times it was like, okay, do I need to have a script done? Does the script need to be produced? Do I need to have representation? And throughout like my journey so far, as those things have happened, I have
Mm.
taken the moment to be like, great job, you've made it to a milestone. It's just been like, okay, great. For example, have rep. That's okay. Am I a writer? I don't know. Let's just move on. Let's try to get something produced. You know what I mean? Then it's kind of like moving on to the next thing without acknowledging the effort it took to get here. So I think that's a really important part in terms of like tackling imposter syndrome is really acknowledging your milestone and the journeys that it took to get to where you are.
Hey folks, sorry to interrupt this conversation with Andrew, but if you do like the content so far, go ahead and like the video, leave me a comment, and of course, smash that subscribe button, and there will be lots more content coming your way, all aimed at making you the best screenwriter you can be. Thanks. I love that. What you've touched on there is that journey of milestones versus vision, and
Mm,
even maybe bringing it back even further from milestones, which could be even just daily habits. Are you celebrating those? Did you sit down for 2 hours and do some writing today, or even 1 hour?
yeah.
If you do that consistently, then you're going in the right direction. But are you taking the time to celebrate that? Do you look back and say, I did 10 hours of screenwriting this week. That means I took a step forward and I should be happy about that. It's tricky because it feels like not much has changed.
Hmm.
You didn't finish a script, you didn't send it to somebody, you didn't get paid to do it, probably. But but you did take steps, you did make progress. And so rewarding yourself for that psychologically or with some kind of treat, if that's what you're into, that's very, very specific to the individual. But rewarding yourself in some way for that, I think, is a huge part of this journey. Um, Before we move on to kind of what we can do about imposter syndrome, because that's very important, but I want to kind of dive in a bit deeper into some reasons why we can get imposter syndrome. And I'd like to start by asking you, do you know why you struggle to give yourself credit for things? Is it something that's always been this way for you? Is it specific to screenwriting, or is it just in general you're not so good at giving yourself credit for things? Because there are a few reasons typically why we get imposter syndrome, and I will go through those. But first and foremost, yeah, where do you think it comes from in you?
Yeah. Oh, okay. We're getting so vulnerable. I love it. I think for me personally,
You didn't
well,
realize this was going to turn into a coaching session, did you?
and I needed it. I needed to get it out in the world. I love that. Well, two thoughts are coming to mind initially. First, I think in life, um, as a creative, I find I feel imposter syndrome a lot. So in addition to writing, I am also an actor and also just a creative in general. Like I enjoy any part of the creative process that I can, contribute to making a vision come to life. But throughout all of those different roles or hats that I may wear, I think I struggle sometimes to take ownership of that and advocate for myself and be like, oh, you have good creative intuition. I think that's a skill that's sometimes hard to quantify. Like if you're good at math, you can, solve problems right off the bat and like prove to someone that you're good at it. Whereas with creative intuition, whether it's writing, acting, directing, whatever, it's sometimes hard to quantify. And so it's hard to say like, yes, I can do this. But then also the other thought that kind of is in line with quantifying things, I think for me, imposter syndrome oftentimes is really tied to capitalism, especially nowadays when it's like, if I'm not getting paid for the work that I'm doing, is it really work? Am I like, I feel like oftentimes we validate our work and what we do with how much we're getting paid and like our ability to I don't know, like in one way, success is kind of defined by like, and survival are kind of two things that go hand in hand under capitalism when in fact I don't think they're as closely tied. So for example, for me, it's like right now I'm not making money on writing. And so sometimes it's hard for me to call myself a writer when people are like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, the way I'm paying my bills is this. But that's not always what brings me fulfillment. So I think a lot of it is tied to capitalism and our need to like our worth is tied to what we produce and how we make money and how we survive. And so for me, I'm trying to detach myself from that and allow myself to create more freely and kind of let the other financial aspects kind of work themselves out on.
Mm, hmm. Yeah. So a couple of things with that. You mentioned if you do math and you're very good at math, it's easy for you to kind of prove that you did a thing. It's more tangible.
Mhm.
Whereas in creativity, it's like, what's the end product that proves that you are good at this? I'm kind of paraphrasing, but is that close to what you were saying?
100%. And the other thing too is like with math, it's right or wrong. With
Right, right. It's
art,
binary. Uh-huh.
absolutely, it's it comes down to personal opinion, and everybody has different thoughts on what is good and what is right and what works in a story and what works in a script, and so that
Mhm.
makes it difficult too.
Yeah, what's really interesting is with imposter syndrome, it can actually happen to people who are naturally good at something. So if you are naturally good at math, yeah, you can prove that you just got the answer correct, but it was so easy for you that you can't bring yourself to take credit for it
Mm,
because you're thinking everyone could do what I just did. And
mm,
I've experienced this with creativity, which is the other sort of danger with being in the creative space. If you are naturally creative, I'm one of those people that I can play music, and certain people, even though they're creative, can't do that. And so when I play a song to somebody that I wrote, they are sometimes, not always, but sometimes they think that's good. That's a good piece of music. I struggle to give myself credit for that because I literally feel like I was born with the ability to play music. So it feels like I haven't done any work towards being able to do that thing.
yeah.
So that's a form of imposter syndrome. And that's again, that's a very tricky one to navigate because you've got this natural ability to do something creative. So it doesn't feel like you put much work into it. And B, even if you did put work into it, how do you then, to
Mm,
your point, prove that there's an end result that's tangible enough for you to take credit for it? It's not like you said, unless you're getting paid, which for some reason has become the gold standard that we can all say, okay, now I can say I'm a professional writer because I get paid for it.
yeah. This is kind of a side note, but you say you play music. What instruments, what kind of music do you play, produce, create?
So I played guitar from when I was about 12. There's a British band called Oasis. Well, there was back then. And I was so obsessed with their music, I demanded that my mother teach me how to play guitar. She was a guitarist for the church. And so she taught me a few chords, and then I ran with it and learned every Oasis song that I could get hold of from this new thing called the internet, which is
Mm,
which ages me hideously. But there was one girl in town that had the internet, and she was able to download these songs for me so I could learn them on my guitar. And then I learned drums for a while. I play keyboard, not very well. And producing, I got into that when I was in my 20s. And by that point, I really liked electronic music. So I was producing house, which later became EDM. And now it's gone back to house because everything is cyclical in music. How about you?
right.
Is there a mutual connection here? Are you a musician as well?
I love music so much. That is not my calling.
Right.
That's one area where I will be really honest. I don't suffer from imposter syndrome in that world because, it's not something I'm claiming to be my gift. I love that for you,
Right.
and I love music, but I'm resonating with a lot of what you're saying in terms of like for things that come easy to you, it's hard to like claim that, that is a gift and a skill that you have. For me, it was um all from a young age, just like performing, public speaking, being in front of people is a skill that I think as I'm growing and I'm, you know, evolving as an artist, I'm like, oh, that is a skill from a young age, being able to like um, navigate a crowd and really understand people and like read people really well, and then like take in life and then internalize it and then produce a story out of it or write something
Mm,
out. Also another skill.
hmm
Uh,
hmm
so all of those are skills that I enjoy. But on the flip side, for me, I sometimes faced imposter syndrome with writing specifically because sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's really difficult in terms of, okay, I have a story idea that I think will that I'm really drawn to, but now it's like the getting it on paper. That's like and going through the notes and all of that. I think the part of writing, at least now, like more in an industry context, that I'm really growing a lot with and learning to navigate is the process of kind of sifting through other people's opinions and how you use that to make your story better. I sometimes, when I receive notes, that can sometimes trigger imposter syndrome for me too. I'm like, oh, okay, does that mean this was trash? And it's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. It's like um, sometimes learning to interpret the note behind the note and like other people's perspective. That's one area where I'm really growing right now, and like I'm learning to enjoy getting notes.
Mm.
I'm learning to give myself time to sit with the notes too. I think is a really important thing because initially, sometimes when you read feedback, it can be like, oh, this is trash, like this is bad, like I don't know how to process this right away. So like sometimes the fight or flight initially goes up, but
Mm.
in reality, I found so much joy by like letting those notes kind of just live inside of me and like marinate. And then I go back to the script with a new idea and like I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. So I kind of like to give myself some time.
Yeah. Well, so a few things came up for me there. Number one is notes are just a thing that will never leave you alone. There's
Yeah.
some of my favorite writers who are massively successful. And I've heard the British screenwriter Simon Pegg talk about this. He's way more than a screenwriter, comedian, director, actor, but he's spoken about this. He had already written and directed, I think, and certainly acted in several award-winning movies, Shaun of the Dead, um, Hot Fuzz. And then he got asked to do some writing on, I think it was one of the Star Trek movies that he helped write. And he got notes. And it was one of the first times he'd got notes. He's like, wait, I've already written these massive movies.
Yeah.
And I get notes. So that really was encouraging for me because it really solidified for me that notes are going to happen.
Yeah.
It is not a reflection of how good you are as a writer. It is a reflection of the process.
Mm,
And like you said, there's a note behind the note. Even if the note itself doesn't make sense to you, it's pointing at something. And
mhm,
actually, what I've come to learn now, and maybe not learn, but the reframe that I apply now is if I'm getting notes on how to make my script better, it's a good sign because
mhm.
if it was really bad, they wouldn't even bother sending notes, right? Notes means they're interested enough to want the script to be better.
Right.
So I kind of reframed it to be, yeah, this is just going to be a part of my career as a
Yeah.
writer. I'm going to get notes.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And not making it so someone once said to me, which I love and I live by now, just in life, things more often than not are purposeful, not personal. And your
Mm,
creative journey, everything has to reframing it through that lens has been so helpful for me because it's like we're oftentimes putting like our hearts on the line. We're putting ourselves on the line when we write a script. Like oftentimes there's pieces of ourselves in it. as even when you write a story that might not be directly from your life, there's little pieces of you in there. And not letting it be personal if someone doesn't like a character or doesn't like a line or some dialogue, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's really helpful as well.
I really like that. You said purposeful, not personal.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I'm stealing that. I don't know where you heard that, but I'm stealing it.
I I have to give credit. I heard it from a mentor and friend of mine named Chess Jacobs. Really wonderful. And now I live by it and I love it. And please take it, spread it, use it, because it's been really helpful for me in terms
What
of
what was the mentor's name one more time?
Chess Jacobs. Chess Jacobs is a wonderful writer, playwright, director, everything.
Okay. All right, let's get them on the show. Let's get them
Yeah,
on an episode.
absolutely.
I'll hit you up afterwards for the referral. All
Yeah.
right. Um, I think so. Those are some reasons we have imposter syndrome. So we talked about sort of that f underlying fear of the unknown combined with this inability to take credit for when we do good for various reasons. There's some other reasons, by the way. I do want to touch on those quickly because for anybody listening, so far they may not have identified with anything that we've said for the reasons behind them. And that's really important to understand why you personally are feeling this imposter syndrome. So the other reason that I come across a lot, as a former coach would be people who have almost ridden a wave of luck, or the darker side of that, if
Mm,
they've cut a few corners and done things in a way that they knew on one end of the spectrum really actually quite manipulative, so they know they actually don't deserve to be where they are. But even if that was in the past, it still kind of haunts their present. And then towards the lighter end of that spectrum, not manipulative, but they just did things, they cut a few corners. They did things in a way that they knew would get them ahead of the pack, which
mm,
seems really tempting at the time. But then when you get there, that's when the imposter syndrome kicks in because you know how you got there.
mm,
So I did want to bring that up just because there's a wide variety of people that could listen to this content and they've got this feeling of I don't belong here. And we have to acknowledge that for some people, that feeling is actually legit. Maybe
mm,
you don't deserve to be where you are. Now,
mm,
if that's the case, the only question you need to ask is what can I do about that now? Because what's done is done. How
mm,
can I now develop myself as a person so that I
mm,
do feel like I belong here? Um, it's important to realize that because also we're in this industry where we're often encouraged to do things the quick way because we all want to be successful. And what I've learned is it just doesn't work. It's like the first time I set up an Instagram account, you could go to these dodgy websites and buy thousands of Instagram followers for a few
yeah.
dollars. And for that 1 week, it looks like you've got 10,000 followers and you feel great. And then you realize that it's actually broken your account because they're all bots and none of them are real. And it's that same feeling of, yeah, this is not really what I thought it would be.
Yeah.
So just wanted to kind of put that one out there on top of all these things. Because yeah, sometimes imposter syndrome, it's real. Like you really
Yeah.
don't deserve to be where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for the initially what's coming to mind too is that's very real, especially in this industry. There's so many people, there's different ways to navigate, and kind of going back to because it all goes back to capitalism. But I think
Mm,
that's the other thing that I'm really realizing as a young creative, very fresh in this industry. I mean, I only graduated about a year ago, and I moved to LA about 3 months ago now. And I'm learning and soaking up so much that I love. And I knew that Hollywood, entertainment industry in general, so much of it was driven by money. But now, as I'm like actively in it, I'm like realizing how much, money and connections and all of these different things can get you into rooms. Um, but once you get into those rooms, exactly like you said, how can I, whether regardless of how I got here, how can I prepare myself or work to be the best that I can now that I'm in the situation? Really
yeah,
important.
for sure. It's when you get that foot in the door, do you have the body of work? Do you have the skill set? Do you have the good script that will then get you to the next step? Because getting into the right rooms is really only the first part of the journey. It's a big part and it's
Hmm.
a struggle. Just did a whole episode on the power of networking. So that's I don't want to go into that again because that would be a repeat. But yeah, having that product, and I refer to scripts sometimes as products because I like to think of it as a product and it has to be good enough to sell. So technically it is a product, you know. So going into the room and having that is really, really important. I do want to go into this whole thing with capitalism a bit deeper with you because I love the way you've framed that. I don't think I had, so where I would say it comes down to being paid, I look at it from the human perspective, which is that it's a form of comparison because I think what's happened is we have somehow accepted that that is the bar to be a writer. You need to be
Hmm.
making money. And
Right.
so, in many ways, it's a form of comparison. I'm comparing me to that writer over there who
Hmm.
has sold 3 features and a pilot and is et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm.
Because if that standard didn't exist and I wasn't making that comparison to somebody else, then my definition of me as a writer comes purely internally. And I get to decide whether I'm a writer or not. And I'm going to come on to that in a second because that comes with some guidelines. But in general, you want to keep that internal feeling, that locus of control inside. Because if you're going outside and making comparisons, you're never going to win. Because
Hmm.
at what point are you a writer? Because let's just say you sell your first feature. Well, are you a writer compared to Aaron Sorkin? No, you're nowhere near that, right? So if you're
Hmm.
playing this comparison game, which is very similar to what you just said about capitalism, because it's all about who sold what projects, who's making what money, who's living in what houses, driving what cars,
Oh yeah.
you're just always going to lose. You're always going to lose because there's somebody out there who's done more, who's earned more, who's sold more. And also what we're doing is, of course, we are comparing our insides to other people's outsides. That's a very common expression nowadays. I love it. I think it sums up the whole problem with social media. Only you know what it's like to be you inside. All your thoughts, all your confusion, all of your chaos. But you compare all of that stuff that you know about you on the inside to what you see people posting on social media, which is just their outsides. It's just
Right.
their shiny bits. It's just the bits they want you to see. And you've got this massively unfair comparison going on. So you're comparing insides to outsides and you're coming up short every single time. And that, of course, you're going to feel like an imposter. Of course, you're not going to feel like a writer because you're playing a really unfair game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, that what you just said, comparing our insides to someone's outsides. I love that. Also stealing that too. But
Well, I
that's all
definitely
that
didn't come up with that. I don't know where I first heard that, but it's in the zeitgeist. It's been said by a few people.
sounds good. Well, we're kind of like spreading things around, sayings around. I love it. I love it. But that's all of social media today. Like literally everything from Instagram to Facebook to LinkedIn, like all of it is just about sometimes it feels like people are really just posting to as an as an ego boost. And it can be so hard when you're like navigating the social realm, um because comparison is like inevitable. It's inevitable that you're going to look at someone, and even if it's not coming from a place of envy, it's like, okay, this is where I am in my journey, like this is what they're doing. I've also found a lot of peace by kind of looking at it like, every time I learn about someone's journey, like for example, how you got to where you are now, how you achieved the things that you did and the milestones on that road, that journey, I now start to think of it like, okay, if I know how John got to where he got and I'm trying to get there, I can no longer go on that same path. I can
Mm.
like take all the gems that you've learned from your path, but I now have to go on a completely different path because that way is already done. And that's kind of been helping me in terms of like comparing myself in a way of like, what can I learn from them? But like, I now cannot go down the exact same path that you have. That's been really freeing as well.
So what I think I'm hearing there is that because you're not that exact person, you can't follow that exact path because they
Right.
have their quirks, they have their way of doing things, and you can't you can borrow from that, you can be inspired by that, but you can't emulate that because you are not them. Am I
Yes.
saying that? Am I saying that? Does that resonate with you?
100%. Yes, exactly. I think there's actually benefits in comparing yourself to people because I think in terms of like, okay, this is where I'm at my journey. This is someone who may have a similar interest or niche or whatever. Like, there's actually a lot of joy that can come from comparing yourself in a way that's like, what can I learn from their
Mhm.
journey? Can I,
Well, that's mentorship, isn't it? Mentorship, if you looked at it in a certain way, you could say it's comparison because you're learning from what somebody else has done. So that's a form of comparison. How did you do that? How can I learn from that? How can I borrow from that? But
yeah,
it's not the same as saying, I'm going to do exactly what you did, because then you'd end up writing the exact same script. And
yeah,
that is not going to work. Your mentor maybe wrote that script 20 years ago. So the industry has changed a lot since then. But I like what you're saying, though. There's that healthy form of comparison where you're learning from somebody
mm,
versus that darker side where you're letting what they've done overshadow you and put you in that place of, yeah, feeling like an imposter again.
100%.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things that I've been doing recently is um, for example, like the Hollywood Reporter puts out a list of like the top showrunners, for example. And let's say somebody wants to be a showrunner one day. I found it so helpful to like go through lists like that, whether it's like top writers, actors, whatever, and doing a lot of research on their journeys, how they got there, and finding common threads, but then being like, okay, this is how they've done it. Like, what is similar and how can I learn and then how can I apply that to my journey without doing it in a way that's like, all right, if they got their job at X company, let's say they were a writer's assistant at this company and that's how they moved their way up. I think it's helpful, like, just to know, okay, what I'm taking away from this is they just got a foot in the door. It
Mm.
doesn't, I need to be a writer's assistant. It's just, I need to find my foot in the door and how that's going to lead me to my destiny helper and my connections and all of that. So I don't
Yeah.
know. That's
Yeah.
that's how I've started to enjoy comparing myself to people.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And you're also touching on there one of the best ways to overcome imposter syndrome. So moving seamlessly now onto some of the action steps you can take. One of them that I wrote down for this conversation is doing the things that will build a stack of evidence that you have done what you needed to do. So it's a separate thing to achieving any kind of specific result. Did you do the things you needed to do to aim at the result? So did you do the 2 hours of writing every day? Did you book that job as a PA? Did you take that online course in character arcs? Did you go to those networking events? If you can look back over 6 months of doing those things consistently, even if you haven't sold a project by then, you're a damn writer, right? What else
Mhm.
are you at that point? You've done the things, okay? You can't predict the outcomes, but your self-worth should never be based on your outcomes because they are out of your control. Your self-worth is always based on your actions. That's all you can control. So if you did the right things, who cares what the outcome is? You're a writer. Would you agree with that?
100%. I love that too. Your self-worth is based on your actions, not the outcome,
Yeah.
which is so important because I think oftentimes you have to be doing the work internally and in your own space so that when you get to those points where a door opens up, you're ready. You have the body of work, the evidence to show that you're about this. And
Mm.
oftentimes, like my parents would say a lot, that heaven helps those who help themselves. And I think in this industry, whether you want to call it luck or you want to call it, whether it's like a spiritual connection or it's a religious thing, whatever it is for us as individuals, I think you have to be helping yourself so that when the stars align or when things line up, you're ready. You can be brought to the next stage. So I think that's really important to focus on your action and not the yeah.
Yeah, actions for sure when it comes to your sense of identity as well. I'm the
Yeah.
kind of person that does my 2 hours every day in the chair, staring at the blank page, even if nothing's coming to me, even if I'm frustrated and what I want to do is go and watch TV, I'm
Mm,
still going to do those 2 hours. And actually, just a quick side note, because I said that, and then as I heard myself saying it, I wouldn't actually stare at a blank page for 2 hours. If it's not coming to me, I'm going to go for a walk, get out there in nature. So I don't want to be hypocritical and say something that I wouldn't do. Um, because I've talked quite a lot on other episodes and in sessions with writers. Like if it's not coming to you, don't try and force it. Like go out, get distracted. It will come to you then. Anyway, side note. But
that's
sorry, go on.
really quick side tangent. Do you feel like as a writer, um, do you still qualify it as writing even if you're not physically writing it down? So for me as an example, like oftentimes I will just be like walking, I talk to myself.
Mhm.
I honestly, if you ever see me in public, you will be like, oh, what's going on? Because for me, I actually like write out loud as I'm walking. I'll be talking through my characters and I will like kind of walk through the shoes of these characters and I'll like kind of talk out scenes just to myself on a walk. And I sometimes qualify that as writing. And then so that when I sit down, it's just like 15 minutes to get the scene out, but I spent 45 minutes on a walk just talking it out. Do you qualify that as part of your journey of writing? Do you think that's different? I know it's different for everyone, but I'm just curious for yourself.
I absolutely would count that. And here's what I do, and this is a tip you can take or leave. Whenever I go out for a walk, I do this at least once a day, and it varies between 20 to 35, maybe 40 minutes. I take my phone because I'm a human being,
Mhm.
but I wear my AirPods or my headphones and I record using my voice recorder on my phone. And so the entire time I'm walking, I'm talking. People that look at me think I'm on a call, but what I'm actually doing is talking through my script, talking through ideas, because that kinetic energy of walking has actually been proven now that when you're walking forwards, your brain is more active than if you just sat down behind a desk. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that I won't go into because that's a whole topic for another discussion. But it's science. Let me just put it that way. So that's the real shortcut to that answer. You will get more creative ideas if you get out and about. Now, look, I'm not saying that you don't then need to sit down and overcome the procrastination and do the work. Absolutely, you need words on pages. But when you get back from a 30-minute walk and you've been recording your voice for 30 minutes, getting all the bad ideas out of the way until you get to the good ones, then you can play that back to yourself while you're sat at your computer. And on the iPhone, which is what I have, I can't speak to any other phones, you can 2x the playback speed. So you can kind of skip through a lot of the stuff that you don't need to write down, then get to the good stuff that came out and you write that down and you're off for another writing session. And then when you get to the point in that session where nothing's coming, you can go out, you can do that again. You can keep doing that. So writing doesn't have to happen at your laptop. In fact, I would say that's the least enjoyable place for you to be writing. I think writing, to your
Mhm.
point, happens when you're out and about, when you're researching, when you're interacting with other people. This is
Mhm.
all, I would count all of that as writing.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for validating me with science. I know that now. Um, so
I didn't really. I just said it's science,
I
which
believe you. Here's the thing. You said it with confidence and conviction, and I believe you 100%. So
I could go into the details, but I typically do that and then end up in a 20-minute detour of this kind of pop psychology amateur neurologist who really doesn't know that much. And people should go and watch other podcasts if they're really interested in learning more about the brain. So I would just say it's science.
and
Yeah.
I believe you.
Thank you. Benefit of the doubt. So I think what we want to do is to kind of bring the conversation around is there's this question of when do you get to say that you are a writer? So coming back to imposter syndrome, right? When is the right time to say, I am a writer? And I do want to take us in that direction because I think it's a really important part of this conversation. Because if you say you are a writer
Mhm.
too late, you've missed out on opportunities. Because here's the thing, on LinkedIn, if it says aspiring screenwriter, not many people are reaching out to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Having said that, other end of the spectrum, If you start saying I'm a writer and you haven't written a damn word yet, not only is your own BS meter going to ping, 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 everybody else is going to notice that eventually as well.
Mhm.
So, where is that sweet spot? Where is it that you say, I'm a writer, and you actually believe it inside? I think that's probably one of the most important questions that a newer writer can really ask themselves. And it does come down to things like not comparing to other people, doing the work regularly. I can't really put a timestamp on this. Like, if you've done this for 6 months, then you're a right. I know I kind of alluded to that earlier, but I started to feel like a writer within the first few weeks of doing it because I felt internally how committed I was to it. I knew I wasn't going to stop. So, no, I wasn't earning money. Yes, I still had a day job, but I knew inside that I wasn't going to stop this thing. And here I am 3 years later, almost haven't missed a day doing some form of screenwriting. So, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's an average amount of time, or do you think it depends on your actions? Where do you sit with this? Like, when do you say that you are? When did it happen for you? I mean, you're pretty confident now that you are a screenwriter. How long did it take you to get to that point?
Yeah. So I would say the first time I felt the confidence to call myself a writer, that's so interesting. One, I would say being validated for your work is really important and you should like let it land. So for me, the first time like I remember it was my senior year of high school, and my choir teacher at the time actually, we had to write these like little essays for choir class about random things. I think that was their way of putting a rubric to like choir because they're not gonna like grade you for you're good or a bad singer. But we had like deliverables and they were like little essays that we had to write. And I remember my choir teacher pulled me aside one day and was like, "Hey, you know, you're a really good writer, right? Like, I know we assign these as just tasks, but you're really good at that." And I remember the first time I was told that, I was like, oh, whoa, like, so to be validated in that way is really important. And I think if you have been or somebody has acknowledged that your work resonates with them, like take that to heart because I think it's really important. And so then in college was where I really started to explore screenwriting, taking some classes. Even when I first started taking classes, I did not feel like I could call myself a writer. I studied acting in undergrad. And so to a certain extent, I felt like if that wasn't, you know, my major or like I'm not getting a degree to call myself that, maybe I shouldn't. But I took some classes. I wrote a couple scripts, but I wrote my first short film probably around my sophomore year. And even then, I was a little scared to call myself a writer. But then I decided to produce it myself. I decided to produce it, and because then again, this recurring theme of being validated. I wrote out the script and I had a professor that was like, "Oh, this is great, and this is something that could be tangibly produced on a college campus." Again, I still was like, I don't know if I'm a writer, but let's produce it, see how it goes. Got some friends together and made a project that I feel like I had something to show. I think so all of this to say, let me kind of because I could go on to how I got here. But one, I think it's important if you've been validated in that way to like, you know, own it, but that doesn't define you.
Hmm.
Secondly, is kind of a body of work and arsenal. If you have something that you can point to say like, yes, I've written something, or like to show like I have the passion for it is important. But then also the consistency. I think after like taking some classes that really helped me get a rhythm, then it was like, okay, all right, maybe let's just own it. Let's just own it because for me, I even now I sometimes I now call myself a writer. If you look at my LinkedIn bio, I call myself a TV writer because I've written scripts that are for TV. They haven't aired on television, but I have that arsenal that I'm like, if anybody were to reach out to me and we're like, hey, it's time to write for TV, I can point to it. Um, but having that arsenal is important, and then the consistency. I think, like you said, having a routine that like I can point to say like I'm actively growing. Like I'm not perfect, and I love that. I love that so much, that I'm not perfect, and I'm really trying to enjoy the journey because I have really ambitious goals. Anybody that gets to know me is like, oh wow, you're you're something. And I love that about myself, but I'm not quite yet where I know I'll be. And so I'm really enjoying the journey of like living in it and calling myself a writer. Because if I don't validate myself, like this industry isn't going to do it for me. You know, there have been people in my life that I trust that have given me that support, and I now feel confident in it. And going back to that idea of like, don't take advice from people you wouldn't take criticism from, or the opposite way. Don't take criticism from people you wouldn't take
Right.
advice from.
Yeah.
Being validated by people that I really trust has been really helpful for me. Um, so yeah, all that to say, wrap it up with 3 points. What I think requires you need to call yourself a writer: one, a body of work; two, consistency and a work ethic that
Mhm.
shows you have a passion for it. And then three, I think it's important to be validated in some spaces. I don't think you should write for people's validity or for people's approval. That's not what I'm saying. But I'll be honest, like I've read some people's work that I'm like, oh, I think you need to like take some more time to grow. And I
Mhm.
think that's an important part of the journey. But if you've shared your work with people that you trust, and they've been able to give you notes, that's the other thing too, is notes come from a place of love. Um, I don't know. I think you should let that land and be able to call yourself a writer. Um, so those
Yeah.
are my three things.
I agree with those. I think the validation thing, I don't love the word because it feels very external, but I know
Mm,
the feeling that you mean. It's that feeling of I've now shared my work with somebody who I trust. Maybe it's an industry professional writer, and they have said, I like this work. At least they've said, this is probably not the right career for you, right? They haven't said that. At least they haven't said that. So I remember that feeling the first time I shared one of my scripts with somebody that I had hired to be my mentor. And he got back to me and said, honestly, I only read the first 5 pages because I can already tell you could be in a writer's room. This is great.
mm,
So it was
mm.
that immediate like, oh, that's all it took to make me feel like, okay, cool, I'm doing the right thing with my life then.
Yeah,
Because if that had come back as, oh, maybe this is, have you considered finance? Then
yeah,
that would be a very different feeling. So as
yeah.
much as I like to say, oh, you shouldn't need external validation, there's a certain form of it that I think really does help, especially when you first start out and you're trying to overcome that feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know if I've made good choices. I don't know if I'm delusional. Having
Mhm.
that first few pieces of positive feedback really, really makes a difference.
Yeah, I don't know what to call that either, because I agree it's not like external validation, it's not necessarily approval, but it's like there's something in having from someone you trust is the big part.
Yeah.
Um,
Somebody who knows what, because, I would even go further than it's not somebody that you trust, although that helps. It's somebody that you trust they know what they're talking about.
right,
Because,
right.
I mean, I trust my mum, right? But if she reads my script and says, this is great, John, I'm glad she likes it. It doesn't mean that I'm a good writer.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I trust that they know what they're talking about specific to screenwriting. That's where the good feeling comes from.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at my notes here to make sure we've covered all the things that I thought we should cover. How do you feel about this, Andrew? How do you feel about this conversation? Do you think we've touched upon all the major parts of imposter syndrome?
I think so. I like have been writing down so much notes. I recently started investing in legal pads because that's a way that I make myself feel like even if I'm not getting paid for it, I'm like, okay, this feels really real now when I write it on
Mm,
pads.
love
So
that.
I've been just jotting down through our conversation so many things that I'm gonna like just sit with. This has been really, really helpful. It's been so fun also to just like talk about it, hear from your perspective, share a little bit about my perspective because ultimately like and I will never claim to know everything, but it's great to share your perspective and hear from someone else. So I feel like we've covered a lot. I
Yeah.
feel really good.
You
And
actually
I
have just reminded me of one more thing to say, actually, because of the legal pad. Um, Keep a journal. This is
yeah.
one of the things that has really helped me with imposter syndrome because if you keep a journal and you
Mhm.
write down all of the things that you actually achieve as and when they happen, you've always got that list. You've got that body of evidence to go back to in those dark moments, and you can say, look what I've done. I've actually got it all written down here by date, by day, whatever, however you organize it.
Mm,
It's very hard to deny that you are a writer or anything else. This applies to anything. When you have it written down right in front of you over the last few weeks and months and years, all the things you've done to become who you are today. So I definitely think keeping a journal of that is super important.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And I agree 100% too. Yeah.
All right, Andrew, this has been an absolute pleasure. Where can people go if they want to know more about you or any projects that you're working on at the moment? Are you on the socials? We will obviously link people in the description, but if they can hear it from you as well, where would people go? What can they do to follow up with you?
Yeah. So I am on the socials. I am my my at is Andrew Otchere. It's spelled Andrew, Andrew, and then Otchere, Otchere. On Instagram, on LinkedIn as well, Andrew Otchere. And then I have a website. I love my website. That for me, investing in my website was a big part of calling myself a writer and a creative. I was like, okay, I need having that www.com for some reason was kind of like, okay. So if you want to check that out. And then currently I am in the middle of this whirlwind of a story called Becoming BFA. It was originally a web series that I created during my senior year of college. It is now on YouTube at Becoming BFA. It's a comedy about theater kids and the craziness of being in a BFA program. If you don't know what that is, it's a Bachelor of Finance program, essentially a performance major, and it's a crazy world. And I've had so much fun writing different iterations of this world. I currently am developing a half-hour adaptation of that, but the web series exists if you'd like to check that out. But feel free to follow me as well. And
Yeah, we will put all the links necessary in the description. This has been so much fun, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time today. And I hope that we can do a part two sometime in the future. I'm very keen to just keep track of you and find out where this whole writing career goes for you. I see some exciting things in the future.
thank you. Thank you so much, John. And I appreciate you inviting me onto this podcast. It really means a lot.
It's been great, man. Let's do it again soon. Take care.
Absolutely.